again. So this is the second eye histology video. The eye is like that, there's a lot of anatomy in there. In the first video we looked at the outer part of the eye, the sclera, the cornea, the vascular layer. Here we're going to look at the front of the eye. So there's maybe more anatomy in there than you realise. So we're going to look at the pupil, the iris, the lens, the ciliary body, the suspensory fibres, and we're going to look at the chambers of the eye as well, and the fluids within the eye, because they're flowing in that anterior part of the eye, which will then let us talk about some of the major causes of glaucoma, one of the major causes of loss of vision to the eye. And we can talk about cataracts as well, can't we? If we're going to look at the lens, we can see how it all works. Okay, so same slide as in the first video. I've got a whole tiny eye on here. Maybe we should have a little zoom around to see what we've got. But here, okay, so there's the cornea. That's the anterior most transparent part of the eye. So if I slide to the right, there we're seeing what's left of the lens, and that heavily pigmented thing up against it, that's the iris. So the gap between that iris and that iris is the pupil. That's where the light goes in through the lens. And then of course we slide back, I'm at my lowest power here, slide back through this big space at the back, and we get to, well, there's the optic nerve and the retina. And we talked about how the sclera is the connective tissue layer, the choroid is that vascular layer, we've got lots of blood vessels in there, and then the retina is that scary layer of neurons, which we'll save until the next video. So let's go back to the anterior eye then. So we've done the cornea. What do we want to look at? Actually, let's talk about the chambers first, shall we? So there are two fluids in the eye, let's say, two humours, and three chambers. The aqueous chamber is anterior to the lens, and the aqueous chamber has aqueous fluid within it, aqueous humour within it. The humour is a fluid, right? The vitreous chamber is posterior to the lens, and the vitreous chamber contains vitreous humour, which is a bit more like a gel. It's got type 2 collagen in there, hyaluronic acid, pulls in a lot of water. And the vitreous humour doesn't circulate in the posterior part of the eye, but the aqueous humour does circulate. And the purpose of the aqueous humour then is it's mostly water, but it's got glucose in there and salts and some proteins and bits and bobs. So the cornea and the lens are transparent and don't have any blood vessels in them. So that aqueous humour is conveying glucose and oxygen and salts to those cells so they can function, and taking away their metabolites and CO2 and that sort of thing, right? And the aqueous humour does circulate. Now, if between the cornea and the lens is the aqueous chamber, that is broken up into two more chambers. If I scroll up, look, there, that heavily pigmented structure there, that's the iris. And the iris is separating that aqueous chamber into two more spaces, right? So we've got an anterior chamber between the iris and the cornea, and a posterior chamber between the iris and the lens. And then posterior to the lens, we're in the vitreous chamber. So that's what I mean about kind of two fluids, three spaces. Think of the fluids and then you'll remember vitreous chamber, aqueous chamber. And then the aqueous chamber is split into anterior and posterior chambers. And that's really important because fluid is constantly being produced, that aqueous humour, and it flows around and it needs to be removed. And the purpose of these fluids is, when we looked at the connective tissues of the eyeball last week, They're very, very tough, but they need pressure from inside to inflate the eyeball. So the fluids are generating pressure as well to give the eyeball its shape. And the shape is crucial because the curve of the cornea is important to the focusing light. And of course, the curve of the retina is also important in collecting that light and focusing that light, and the distances need to be correct. So the fluids are crucial in the shape of the eye, maintaining the shape of the eye and then maintaining the function of the eye. And the vitreous humour is probably helping hold the retina up against the choroid layer, and it's probably also helping support the lens to a certain extent, right? Okay, let's have a look at the iris first. The pupil's pretty easy to look at, right? It's nothing. The pupil is the gap between, well, the gap, the hole that the iris goes around is the hole that lets light pass through. It's just black because the inside of the eye is black. Right, so there's the iris. Now the iris, let's bump up. So that was a 4 times objective lens. This is a 10 times objective lens combined with 10 times magnification eyepieces. This is 100 times magnification to my eye. It might be a little different for you depending upon the size of your screen. Now, so anterior is to the left, posterior is to the right. So the anterior iris, very interestingly actually, is it's connective tissue with fibroblasts and melanocytes. There's no epithelial covering there. And what we've got there is the melanocytes, your particular distribution of melanocytes producing pigment in your iris, how they're distributed and the pigments they produce. That's what determines what your iris looks like. So that's those pigmented cells in there. And then we've got fibroblasts, jump up to my 20 times lens, so 200 times magnification. The fibroblasts are maintaining the connective tissue there, and blood vessels are supplying blood, right? So we're seeing lots of pigmented cells in the iris. So that's the anterior surface to the left of the screen. Now the deep surface to the right is incredibly heavily pigmented. We have got 2 layers on that side. There is a smooth muscle layer, which is a little bit reddy pinky, and then there is a heavily pigmented layer. Now that heavily pigmented layer, so again lots of melanin being made by melanocytes, that's what we find throughout the inside of the eyeball. So this is a continuation of that. If I slide up, is this going to be off-putting? There we go. We follow the iris around, we can see how it meets the inside of the eyeball, and you can see how the inside of the eyeball is similarly pigmented as we follow it around. Let me go back to that, the iris there. Okay, so we've got that heavily pigmented layer. The purpose of the pigment inside the eye is to stop light bouncing around and scattering, which helps with seeing properly. And then the smooth muscle layer that's up against that heavily pigmented layer, those are the 2 muscles that dilate and constrict the pupil. Dilator pupillae and constrictor pupillae muscles. And the dilator pupillae muscles are in the outermost parts of the iris, and the sphincter pupillae muscle is in the, there we go. You see how that's a bit different? That's quite nice, isn't it? Now I look at it. The sphincter pupillae muscle is in the part of the iris closest to the pupil. So those are the actual muscles we're talking about. Absolutely tiny, aren't they? So those are under autonomic nervous control, and they obviously change the size of the pupil by moving the iris to let more light in when it's dark and to let less light in when it's bright. Let me go back to the 100 times magnification. Okay, so there's the iris. We can see the connective tissue layer with melanocytes, we can see the sphincter pupillae layer, and we can see the heavily pigmented layer. And actually we're right up against the lens there, but that's probably because this is moved a little bit with preparing the specimen rather than maybe being completely true to life, because we can see a few kinks here, right? It's lost a bit of its shape. Imagine this is a complete disc with a hole in the middle, right? A disc with a hole in the middle is structurally pretty sound, isn't it? Whereas here we're just looking at a section through that, so it looks like it's a bit of a wafty, thin bit of tissue, which is exactly what we're left with. Now, have you heard about the angle in the eye? Maybe you've heard of open angle of glaucoma and closed angle glaucoma. What are people talking about? What is the angle? Well, let me go down to the other iris. There we go. So there's the other iris. See those two layers again. Now, if we follow the iris down, it will meet with the cornea, essentially. Let me go to a lower power again. So this is the 40 times magnification. Where the iris meets the cornea, that is the angle of the eye. In there, that's where the aqueous humour is taken out of the anterior chamber. It's absorbed and put back into the blood. This is really important. We will come back to this later because we need to tell a little bit more of the story first. So there we go. There's the iris. There's the lens, which we'll look at the end. Now, if I go posteriorly, so look, there's the iris. So we're looking posteriorly. If I go further back, you can see how most of the eyeball looks like that. We've got like the retinal layer, the choroid layer, and the connective tissue layer. So as we go here, you can see that that's a little bit special. This is the ciliary body. Now, the ciliary body is special because this is a ring of muscle around the inside of the eye. So it's a circular, smooth muscle. And the lens is suspended from it. So there's the lens. Can we see some little tiny fibres? We can, can't we? I don't know if I managed to focus it okay for you guys. It's a bit tricky at this power. Let's jump up to 100 times. You see those little wispy lines in there? So those are the suspensory fibres linking the lens to the ciliary body. One of the best names in the business, the zonule of Zinn. But we don't call it that anymore because we use contemporary terms. So the ciliary body then has got a number of features. Let me jump back out to 4 times or 40 times. So you've got the ciliary body, which is a ring. The lens is in the middle, and it's suspended from the ciliary body by the suspensory ligament of the eye, by zonular fibres, by the zonule of Zinn. Lots and lots and lots of tiny fibres. There's a bit of tricky anatomy understanding here, and there's a bit of a cool fact. These fibres are actually made of fibrillin, not collagen. Fibrillin is it's another microtubule structure, but it's not collagen, it's different, which is really interesting. It's one of those microfibrils that is not stretchy, great at withstanding tensile forces, you know, that sort of thing. And what happens is that the lens, being a little bit like a gel, it can change shape. So when that ring, the ciliary body, when the ring is relaxed, it is a big ring, and the fibres are pulling on the lens, so the lens is pulled so that it is thin. And when the lens is thin, it is good at focusing on objects at a distance. When that ciliary body contracts and the ring becomes smaller, the tension is taken off those suspensory fibres. And the lens then is allowed to relax and shrink and change shape. And as a result, it gets fatter. And when the lens gets fatter, it's then good at focusing on objects which are close up. This is part of accommodation. The lens changing shape actually gets worse as you get older, which is why when you get to my age, you're pretty much guaranteed to need reading glasses. We'll come back to that later. But that's what the ciliary body does, and that's quite tricky to remember and understand. It's a little bit counterintuitive. When the muscle contracts, the ring gets smaller, the lens gets fatter, you focus on near objects. But there's another feature we can see there. Right, those sticky outy bits that we can see are ciliary processes. So these are sticking out from the ciliary body. Now you can see there's the ciliary body there, smooth muscle and melanocytes and pigment like we find everywhere else in the body. Whereas those ciliary processes are different. I don't know if you can see there, but there are two layers of cells. So we've got one layer of that heavily pigmented epithelium, and then we've got another layer of not at all pigmented epithelium. So this is at 200 times magnification. And it's these cells so we've got two epithelial cells there, two epithelial layers there, right? We've got a bit of a simple cuboidal epithelium, which is very neat, and we've got those melanocytes. And the cells of the ciliary processes are producing aqueous humour constantly. They make less of it when you're asleep, I think. They make more of it first thing in the morning, but they are continuously making aqueous humour, and that aqueous humour is going into the posterior chamber of the eye. So these cells look cuboidal here, or maybe short columnar. They're often, oh, those look more columnar. Oh, yeah, they look more columnar over there, don't they? These, that epithelium is often a simple columnar epithelial layer in humans. I don't know what animal this is from. Now, these cells are making aqueous humour then, and that aqueous humour, like I say, is passing into the posterior chamber, into this space between the iris and the lens. And remember, we can't see those zonular fibres, those suspensory fibres in there, but that fibre meshwork is running all the way around the lens. So to all intents and purposes, it's a barrier, it's a wall, a permeable wall. So the aqueous humour passes into the posterior chamber and then flows around the lens, between the lens and the iris, and then it flows through the pupil to the anterior chamber, and in doing so then it can nourish the cells of the cornea and the cells of the lens. And that fluid is circulating, there are currents in here, and the fluid at the angle that we were looking at earlier in here, in there is a network of trabecular sinuses. So in at the angle here, now this has all come apart a little bit with sectioning, so maybe you'll have to go on trust a little bit, but because the layers have separated, right? But you can see how in there we've got some flattened tubes that have been cut in cross-section, right? Now, they're different to the spaces over here. So we're looking at where the cornea meets the iris, and in the cornea you've got loads of collagen fibrils nicely arranged, and after death fluid is moved in here and the collagen fibrils have come apart. So we're not looking at real spaces there, we're looking at spaces that have occurred after death. Whereas here, these little diddy spaces I'm looking at there, they're lined by cells, they're lined by an endothelium. So we are in the connective tissue layer, the cornea becoming the sclera. And on that deep surface then, there is a trabecular meshwork. Don't know how well we'll be able to see anything, but that trabecular meshwork are spaces in the connective tissue lined by endothelium There you go, we're seeing some tubes there. Maybe it's believable. And the aqueous humour flows in there at the angle between the iris and the cornea. And then that trabecular meshwork passes that aqueous humour into something called the canal of Schlemm, Schlemm's canal, and that's like a ring that runs around the eye in this layer here, and then that aqueous humour is passed into blood vessels and it goes back into the blood. So there's a constant flow. The cells of the ciliary body are making aqueous humour, the cells of the ciliary processes rather are making aqueous humour. It flows through the posterior chamber, through the pupil, into the anterior chamber, down to the angle, into the trabecular meshwork, into the canal of Schlemm, and back into the venous side of the cardiovascular system. And that constant flow is great. It means the cells here that don't have blood vessels get nourished. All right, glaucoma. So, glaucoma is a general term. Raised pressure inside the eye, for whatever reason, will compress the optic nerve and damage the optic nerve, leading to loss of vision in that eye, and permanent loss of vision in that eye. And there are a number of causes. In terms of what we're looking at today, we're looking at the angle between the iris and the cornea. Acute angle closure glaucoma, or closed angle glaucoma, or narrow angle glaucoma, they're all the same thing. They've just got different terms. That refers to that angle being closed. The iris has been moved and it's squashing, it's covering the opening to that trabecular meshwork, which means that that aqueous humour is still being produced, but now it's not flowing out of the anterior chamber as it should, as quickly as it should. This is an acute condition. This is rapid onset. There's a physical change. The iris has moved, and so this will come on quite quickly. And this is an ophthalmic emergency. You need to fix this ASAP. It's very uncommon, but that's what we mean by closed angle glaucoma. That angle gets closed by the physical movement of the iris to somewhere it shouldn't be, and that drainage system gets physically blocked by the movement of the iris. Open angle glaucoma is it the most common form of glaucoma? Probably. That means that that angle is as it should be, right? Nothing's moved. The angle is as it should be. So open angle glaucoma means that there's something wrong with that trabecular meshwork, something wrong with the fluid flow into it or through the canal of Schlemm, because there's quite a lot going on there physiologically. So open angle glaucoma just means that the angle is normal as it should be. That's not the problem. The problem is with the fluid drainage system itself. And that means that the fluid is going to be made by the ciliary processes. It's not going to drain away properly. And this is much more of a chronic problem. This is a very slow to develop problem. I think you get loss of the peripheral visual fields first. Now, the lucky thing is, lucky, I don't know. There is an alternate route, an unconventional route it gets called. And some of the aqueous humour can actually flow out through the ciliary body and into the sclera, apparently. And there are drugs that you can take as eye drops that will take advantage of that and increase the amount of aqueous humour that flows out through that route. So managing the pressure in the eye. Interesting, huh? Glaucoma is often a bit of a mystery. Hopefully I've demystified it a little bit by looking at these microscopic structures and showing that they're real. All right, one thing left to talk about, and it's this guy up here, or what's left of him. Now, I haven't looked at this yet, so I don't know what this is going to look like. But this is the lens. Now, I think the lens is a bit weird. I guess it's because I'm a connective tissue biologist, or was. It's not It's not really connective tissue. What we're looking at there is we're looking at cells, or the remains of cells that have taken up the stain that was added to the section. Okay, and there's other weirdness. Let's jump up again. So, oh, blimey, just about see. Oh, we can just about see. That's very neat. See if I can find a good bit. What we've got going on here is, can you see? Just about maybe. The lens has a capsule, but it's, so you can see the capsule on the lens there, right? But it's actually a basement membrane. So a basement membrane is a connective tissue sheet that epithelial cells stick to, and that's how you make your epithelium. The basement membrane's on the outside. Usually the basement membrane's on the inside and the cells stick up from it, right? So we've got this, the capsule of the lens, and I think it's the thickest basement membrane in the body because they're usually like super thin. So we've got the capsule, this thick basement membrane, and then you've got a layer of cells. We can see their nuclei up against it. So this is a simple cuboidal epithelium. So the subcapsular layer. And there we go. You can see that capsule, and you can see that subcapsular layer, that subcapsular epithelium. Those cells will become the cells inside the lens because, yes, inside the lens, those are cells. And those cells, they've lost their nuclei, they've lost their organelles, and they've been filled with crystallins. Proteins specially adapted to change the refractive power of the lens to focus light on the retina. So normally, of course, this is all completely clear. This has just been stained so that we can see it. So what we're looking at in here are the remnants of lens fibres. What were the cells of the lens packed with crystallins. So most of the lens is made up of these things. And that subcapsular epithelium is on the anterior surface of the lens. Oh, there, that's really good. Oh, we can see those layers as well. Look at that. So we're now looking at the bottom edge. Well, we're looking at the side of the lens, and we find that epithelium at the side of the lens, and then it stops. Look, there isn't an epithelium on the posterior surface of the lens, but we've still got that capsule, and it's even getting thicker. But I haven't got many eye sections, and I think this is the best one. But look at that weird structure in there. Isn't that cool? Lens fibres that come from, oh, they look good on this side as well. Yeah, capsule, subcapsular epithelium, and lens fibres. And look, you can see them going through that process. Those cells have still got their nuclei, whereas you go deeper, they've lost their nuclei, they've lost their organelles. So these subcapsular cells are producing new lens fibres through life, which is handy. Weird. Again, there are no blood vessels in here. These cells are getting their nutrition from the aqueous humour. And actually, while we think of the lens as focusing light on the retina, which it does, most of the refractive power of the eye is actually in the cornea, this structure here. This does most of the work of focusing light, and then the lens does the rest of it. The lens with age is subject to cataract. So a cataract is a lens that becomes opacified over time. it becomes cloudy, which is obviously going to affect vision. The usual risk factors, so UV light, age, smoking, diabetes, and the age is associated with oxidation over time. So the older you are, the more likely you are to get cataracts. And you can fix this by taking the lens out and replacing it with a manufactured lens. And I think that's the most common surgery in the world, isn't it? Cataract surgery. And of course that lens, you can't use it to focus on near objects anymore because it's a manufactured lens, it's of a specific shape, but you can fix that with reading glasses, and by the time you need cataract surgery you're probably using reading glasses because your lens doesn't change shape very well anyway, right? The lens is actually well hydrated, whereas the cornea is dehydrated to help arrange the collagen fibrils and make it transparent. The lens is made of different things, cells filled with crystallins. It's actually well hydrated, and that's important for its function. But there we go. We've looked at the structures of the anterior eye. We've looked at the lens, the ciliary body, the suspensory ligaments, those fibres there. We've looked at the iris and the layers and the ciliary processes. We've looked at the chambers. We've looked at the pupil. We talked about how aqueous humour flows around. We talked about glaucoma. We talked about cataracts. That's a lot of clinically relevant anatomy. The eye is so important. You know, we're both using ours right now, and you don't need me to tell you how important the eye is. Anyway, I hope that's helped your understanding. I hope that's improved your understanding of not just the anatomy of the eye, but the cells of the eye and how all this works. Oh dear, we better try and grapple with the retina next week in the final video. Yeah, good luck everybody.